Now let's talk about finding the UUID using the blkid command, and we'll use that UUID in editing the etc. fstab file, or as you'll hear me call it, the etc. fstab file. We'll also talk about mounting and unmounting partitions. Now, using DFH here, you can see that we have devsda1 mounted. But if we use sudo fdisk l, you can see that we have devsdb1, and devsdc1, being the partitions there, connected to the computer, but they're not mounted. So since the file systems are not mounted, we can't read or write to them. So let's begin by creating some mount points here for devsdb and devsdc. I have changed into the root directory, and now we'll be moving into the mount directory, mnt for mount. This is typically where you're going to have folders to mount your different partitions into, so that you can then access your different partitions. So they'll be mounted to this location. I'm going to make a new directory. Let's just call it SDB for simplicity's sake. Sudo make directory SDB. And then let's go ahead and make just SDC. And that's where I'll be mounting devsdb1 and devsdc1. So you can see them in there. I already have another directory in there that I was using personally earlier called HFS. I was mounting an HFS plus file system from Macintosh in here. Not covered in the video, just letting you know why HFS is in there. You should not have a directory called HFS. Your mount directory should be empty until you add some directories. Now what we can do is sudo mount t for type. devsdb, well, let's take a look here. I think it's still ext3 from our last video. And that's right, it doesn't show you ext3 or ext4. I'm going to go into parted here and then print all. So yes, devsdb is ext3 and devsdc1 is ext4. So let me exit out of there. So our command would be sudo mount -t for the type, ext3, then the partition that you want to mount, in this case devsdb1, and then the location that you would like to mount it. In this case, mount SDB. So by running that command and then dfh, you can now see at the bottom that devsdb1 is mounted. If we want to mount devsdc1, let's remember that it is ext4, and then we will type devsdc1, and we want to mount it in SDC. Those are now mounted. You can see them right there. Now that they are mounted, we can actually read and write to these file systems using these mount points. So if I cd into SDB, then shouldn't be anything in there. Lost and found because it's an ext3 file system. But in here, we're actually in the file system. So anything that is placed in this directory is now going on that hard drive. Okay? So if we make any directories, I keep forgetting to use sudo here to create these. All right, getting ahead of myself there. So there's the hello directory that you can see, and it's placed on this hard drive. Okay, so any information contained here, obviously, if we unmounted the file system, would no longer be accessible to us. And unmounting is very simple. Sudo umount. Now, do remember that this is not unmount. It is umount. It stands for unmount, but it's umount. It's very easy early on. Trust me, it's very easy when you're using the server to have this moment of panic where you're like, how do I unmount a drive? I thought it was unmount, because it's umount. Why they chose to drop out an N, I mean, just to make it a little bit shorter, I really don't know. All right, let me unmount devsdb1. Okay, it says right now the device is busy. Maybe that's because I had it open there. I'm not actually sure why it would be busy. Let me sudo umount dev sdb1 like that. Okay, there you go. Now it's no longer busy. Maybe because I had it open there. Yeah, probably because I had it open there in the shell. So it wasn't letting me do that. That makes sense. Okay, and now you can see here with DFH that dev sdb1 is officially unmounted. That being the case, if we change over to mount SDB, there's nothing in there, right? So I'm hoping you're understanding how this is working. Because we unmounted that file system, you're not able to access that file system. This is just an empty directory. But of course, if we go ahead and mount this again, dev SDB1 to mount SDB, and then we perform ls, once it gets in there, cd back to root, cd to mount, cd to SDB, list the contents, there it is. Okay, so that's all pretty basic. For the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about an easier way to mount things. Like, it's kind of obnoxious that you have to specify the type and where you want to mount it. I'm going to show you a way, by adding it to the file system table, that you could just do mount dev sdb1 like this, and it will automatically mount it for you. Now, it is a good practice to use blkid, sudo blkid, to gather the UUIDs of the partitions that you would like to set up in your file system table. UUID stands for Universal Unique Identification Number. So you can see a very long string here for these different partitions, okay? It's just a best practice to add the UUID into the file system table, okay? Now, I have a big benefit here because I'm running in SSH here through PuTTY on a Windows system. So my big advantage there is that I can actually copy out of the terminal very easily, okay? So you can either write that number down or write it to a file or something like that so that you can access it. And where we'll be going now is into sudo nano etc fs tab for the file system table, or I just call it etc fstab. Okay, and what we have in here is SDA already set up. Okay, so you can see the UUID for dev SDA1, which is our primary partition, and then dev SDA5, which is our swap partition, which we haven't talked about at all and I won't cover in this video series. What we want to do now is to add an entry. If you look at the top, about midway in the file, you'll see File System, Mount Point, Type, Options. Again, we have the benefit of being in SSH here, so I can show you right here. Okay, you have your header here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to simply add a new file system. Okay, and again, I can copy this information over here, which is so convenient. So I've copied over, this is the UUID for dev SDB1, followed by the mount point. We want it to be mounted here at mount SDB. Oh, and by the way, you can use tab to just tab over to keep everything kind of neat and tidy. Here in the file system table, okay, that's the type. Options, if you want any options, in this case, we're not going to add any options. Defaults will be there by default, so that's fine. And then dump and pass. Dump and pass really can be 0, and I'll make pass 2, okay? On this particular one, we're not going to go into the particular details there. All right, just know that I'm telling it now using the UUID that I am going to mount dev SDB1, which is this partition right here, to mount SDB. And, oh, we didn't say type. That's what I missed. Mount. Let's go back. Okay. So file system first, mount point, type, which in this case is ext3, so that we don't have to specify it on the command line anymore. No options here. 0 and then 2. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and write defaults. Okay, there we go. Okay, so you can see here what we have now. File system, mount point, file system type, any options that you want, dump, and pass. And let's go ahead and write this out. And now we can issue the command I showed you, sudo mount, we need to unmount it first. Unmount dev SDB1. It says busy right now. It is a USB drive, so if that tells you anything. Sometimes I feel like they're a little more finicky. Because right now it says the device is busy. There is a way to force it. You can force an unmount. You want to be careful with that, okay? There can always be data loss there. Oh, we're in Mount SDB again. I keep doing that. So don't be silly like me and be like, why is it not unmounting? Because I'm in dev SDB. I'm in the file system. Okay. Don't be silly like me. Sudo umount dev SDB1 has now unmounted that partition. And now all we have to do is sudo mount dev SDB1. Isn't that so much nicer? You don't have to specify where or what type it is. Boom, you've got it in your file system table, and there it is. There it is right there, waiting for you, ready for you to utilize. Okay? So those are the basics of mounting, unmounting, finding the universal unique identification number for your partition, and editing the etc. fstab file, or the file system table. All right. This is really the extent of what I'm going to cover on file systems. This should be enough information to get you started, and so get comfortable with this information, and if you have questions, please ask me any questions about this. I realize that people are going to be coming from all different backgrounds, so you might have experience partitioning, experience managing file systems, and you might not, and that's perfectly okay. So just give me those questions, and I will be happy to answer them if anything was unclear or anything was not covered here that you would like to have covered and would like the answer to.